But my name is Ozoemena Nnamadim. I'm a CPA, certified public accountant, and I'm the owner of Nnamadim CPA PLLC, a management strategy and innovation consultancy. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then hopefully folks will just join as I walk through the presentation. But my name is Ozoemena Nnamadim. My bad on this. Thanks, Dickie. I appreciate it. I'm also hype. This session is in partnership with the B-Suite. So thank you to the B-Suite for the platform allowing me to host and facilitate this session. So super grateful and thankful for that. Today is session topic is mastering nonprofit audits. And so a little bit of background about myself before I kind of like dive into the presentation is that so I already introduced myself as like a CPA. I started my career at KPMG in the federal audit practice for about 3.5 years, and working in the federal audit space, also auditing the federal government for treasury reporting requirements. And then after about 3.5 years there, I pivoted to the DC Washington Public Charter School Board. And there I was responsible for financial oversight over the 66 LEAs at the time, and their kind of like financial management. So specifically coordinating with the faculty, not the faculty, but coordinating with the finance managers at individual schools to collect financial reports, making sure that, their reporting came through to the DC DC PCSB agency, and that financial oversight was being monitored. So all of their key financial trends, recalculating ratios, and monitoring performance of or their financial performance. And then from there, I took a couple small jobs, then ended up at Deloitte in a technical accounting and consulting role. And then after that, I started my firm. So this is very much like a nonprofit focused session. I am an auditor by trade, so that's kind of like my background. And then, so this will just go in detail around the audit process and give a little context behind how to prepare, how to engage your internal stakeholders, and then how to utilize the results to drive operational efficiency. So with that, the first slide here, like I kind of walked through in the intro, it'll go through the audit process in detail. And then the next objective is to really, give some kind of practical steps on how to prepare. The third is to provide some best practices on communicating and like internal and external communication, so with your auditor, and then within your finance and accounting teams and throughout your organization. And then the last is to provide some context on how you can use the results, not just like most folks view audits as like a compliance requirement, but especially like with a single audit, you can utilize the results to actually, redesign your processes, think about some operational efficiencies, and have it add value to your organization from an operational standpoint. So here's the roadmap, providing some background context. So it's an agenda and a roadmap, nice little visual. But this is start with the background context on why audits are important. And then the next is like how to prepare your team, and your team being your board and your board treasurer. So those at the governance level, and then your management and operations team, and then your finance and accounting team. And then from there, the next steps are kind of just like what you can expect from like throughout the audit process. And then the last step is how to evaluate the results that come out of an audit. So this slide here, there are kind of 4 buckets as to like why audits are important. So the first is to comply with the laws and regulations. So federal law requires it. OMB uniform guidance. I say federal law, but it's a federal statute. I don't want to misspeak. OMB uniform guidance requires that organizations that receive $1 million or above in federal funding like receive a single audit or go through a single audit. And that number increased this year from $750,000 to $1 million. So that's a 2024 update. The next is your state charter authorizer will require them for their oversight. So depending on which jurisdiction you're in, there are different disclosure requirements, but state charter authorizers require charter schools to be transparent in their financials. So they do that by, requiring the third party independent audit and then taking that audit to be shared to the authorizer so that everyone is clear on how an individual charter school is performing. And then the third bucket is local education agency requirements. So if it's not your state charter authorizer, some other agency will require it. So maybe your superintendent, your superintendent's office, your just the overall education sector broadly. The first bucket is really to just like comply with all of the rules that are in place within your jurisdiction. The second one is for transparency to your stakeholders. So audits provide external stakeholders like some assurance that they can rely on the financial statements. So with that, that means basically someone who's not internal to your organization, they have an independent report that provides some value and says like, hey, this set of financials is materially correct and it will not result in like, or it should not result in you changing your opinion or any decisions that you would make based off of relying on this set of financial statements. And so your main external stakeholders as a charter school is your parents or your parents and your students. And so with an independent audit, you will hopefully increase your parents' confidence in your organization's fiscal responsibility and your fiscal management. So then ultimately your parents are not worrying about the financial operations of your school, and they can focus on like, the academic quality and making sure that the organization is actually, serving their student well. So that is the second bucket. The third is grant requirements. So different grantors and funders will require it. The fourth is it helps you identify like risk and rethink about how your processes are designed. So it really helps you kind of like mitigate risk of fraud and like, prevent, financial mismanagement. In the DC statutory requirement, it says mismanagement within the School Reform Act. So I will use that. But mismanagement can happen in a number of different ways with asset allocation or fraud. It says optimize to prevent fraud, and that is a typo. I don't know how that got there, but I will update that before sending out this deck. And so, so process improvement. This slide here, it's how to prepare for an audit. So the first slide was really how to understand like why an audit is important and how it provides value. And this slide here, it's like how to prepare and who to prepare. So your board is kind of like your first they're responsible for everything from like a legal and compliance with your state charter authorizer. They are kind of like on the legal articles of like formation and all of those things. So your board is kind of like principal to engage, in my bad. Outside of that, so how do you engage them? They will manage the RFP process because this will be a significant contract. They will, in the RFP process ends in, selecting an auditor. They are also responsible for approving the accounting policies and procedures. So your finance and accounting team will draft those, but ultimately the policies and procedures get kind of like rolled up and presented to the board. And then the last one is reviewing material transactions. So any significant transactions, you want to make sure that your board is aware. So sometimes schools will take over another school and then have like a turnaround plan. Obviously your board is going to review those types of transactions. But there could be leases, significant leases, or any other type of material transaction that your organization will go through. So that's kind of like your board and the treasurer and the finance committee's role. And then the second is auditors may require a couple of meetings with your board, and the key meetings that they will have or be required, or they will require, are a general kickoff meeting to kind of go through the audit plan from start to finish. They will require an exit conference that says hey, here's what we plan to do. And the exit conference goes and says here's what we actually did, here's what we found, and here's kind of the results of the audit. And at some point in between start to finish, there will be some inquiries with your board chair, your board treasurer, and other, folks who are incremental or instrumental in the financial management piece. So that's kind of how to prepare for the board. How to prepare your board for an audit. If you have questions, I think that's really straightforward. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And then preparing for an audit. So here's kind of more from a management and operations standpoint. So this is kind of more practical level thing. So the last slide was ended with the kickoff and the exit conference. Your management team will probably be the one who plans and coordinates those. So you'll be working with your management team, your finance team, and your board to kind of get those on the calendar. So that's the first thing. The second thing is going to be you want to set up some internal and external status update meetings. So those will include, meeting with your finance team to say, hey, have we gone through our close procedures throughout the year? What's missing? Are our policies and procedures updated? Do they reflect the current way that the organization operates? And you want to do that on a recurring basis. You want to meet with your team throughout the audit. Your auditors will send over requests. You want to be aware of, what information is pending or outstanding, who you need to follow up with within the organization. Sometimes those folks are not within the accounting and finance function. And that kind of just helps with, making the audit run smoothly. Your auditor, more likely than not, will set up a recurring external status meeting. And so that external status meeting will pretty much be the auditor giving you an update on their work, and saying, hey, here's kind of where what the auditors have tested, what's outstanding, any outstanding document requests, any significant findings, and any kind of deviations from the plan. So that's kind of the second bucket on how to prepare your management and operations team. The third is kind of a more specific preparation item is if you're not a new school and this is not your first year being audited, then you will have a management letter. So each year, your auditors are required to submit a letter to your board and to your management team that says, hey, here were the findings. And sometimes the findings that were in the management letter are not items that are reportable, meaning they don't modify the audit opinion, but they will kind of warrant your management team kind of like reviewing items in more detail. So that's kind of what the management letter does. So that's actually a great starting point for how to prepare, like from like a tactical perspective. It's what did the auditors find last year? What did they recommend in the management letter? And then how do you kind of like take those recommendations and make them operational within your organization? And that's what the management letter does. So that's the third bucket. The fourth is tapping your key personnel and making sure that they're ready for process interviews, how they fit into the internal control process, and then that they are, going to be tapped by the auditors for key inquiries, for what they might be aware of throughout or significant changes throughout the year, how the financial operations went throughout the year, so on and so forth. And then the last one is like, updating all the policies, procedures, SOPs, making sure that everything is correct. So that's how you prepare your management team. I think that those are really straightforward, but I will move on to the next slide. So the finance and accounting team, here's like some details on how they will be preparing. So your finance and accounting team throughout the year, they have usually most teams will have like a month-end close process. And specifically for board reporting, they will take those month-end close processes, and on a quarterly basis, they will have a quarterly close process to where they submit a package of financial information to your board, so that your board is aware and up to date on the financial health of the organization. So that, like, those processes throughout the year, you want your team to have like already documented like your key reconciliations for all your balance sheet accounts, making sure that journal entries are posted accurately, that you've documented your month-end close process via the checklist. Like, that's just something that's standard. It's not a requirement, but it is definitely a standard and a good best practice to have. And then the third is, internal controls exceptions happen throughout the year, but you want to make sure that as you've gone through your internal controls, or that as you've gone through your month-end close processes, that you've documented the exceptions and documented why they exist, and then also document your considerations for how you've kind of like ensured that those transactions that they relate to are actually posted accurately, and that they still reflect the underlying transactions and they don't misstate the financial statement. So that's kind of the first bucket. The second is, reviewing last year's disclosures and like last year's financial statements and last year's disclosures. So you have like key financial statements, footnotes within your financial statement package. Those will include narratives around like key changes and like material financial statement accounts. Just like update those. And so 2 and 3 go hand in hand here. So as you are kind of reviewing your financial performance throughout the year, you want to, document the material fluctuations, and then making sure that anything that's like significant, you want to make sure that those get presented within the disclosures in the appropriate place. And you also want to make sure that you are prepared to answer questions that the auditors might have with regard to those transactions. The fourth is a really straightforward example, but it's like preparing the draft financial statements. And the best way to do that is to, really take your last year statements, update them with the transactions for this year, and then, make sure that they like bump it up against the GAAP checklist, which is going to be like your specific disclosure checklist that says like everything that US GAAP requires you to have. And then also like not just the GAAP checklist, but charter schools specifically have a requirement depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So like DC, for example, has the technical audit guide or the technical accounting guide. I think it's the FAR technical guide is the appropriate term. But that FAR technical guide says like what are the audit guidelines, what are the audit requirements for each individual disclosure. And so your finance team can kind of like get ahead of your auditors by, making sure that they have like considered all the disclosures that PCSB or any other authorizer is requiring. And then you can, update your draft financial statements with those additional requirements. And the last thing is just to remember that process improvement is like an ongoing process. So it's not going to be like a one and done type of thing. You really are going to have to like, really assess like how your internal control environment is like changing, or like who, as you rotate staff in and out, and like divvy up responsibilities, making sure that like if folks are like reviewing or in the process that they are, aware, and they also can like provide recommendations on like how to improve key processes. So it's just an ongoing process. It's not like a one and done type of thing. Sorry, excuse me. So here are some examples of key financial statement line items that nonprofits and specifically charter schools will have. I won't go down the entire list, but here's kind of just like 8 key financial statement line items that are, relevant for charter schools. This will include, cash equivalents, grant management processes, your investment, or your investments in general, leases, property, plant, and equipment, payroll and HR, accounts payable, and accounts receivable for state and federal funding. So on the left are the line items and like how they will be presented sometimes within the financial statements. And I won't say sometimes, most of the time, how they're presented within the line items. And then the column on the right is just like some key documentation that you would want to like retain as a part of your like review process, your month-end close process. But these are really simple items like, the bank statements, you want to have your reconciliation, signed copies of checks and invoices, some items for your grants, making sure that, you have your contracts, have any modifications to the grant agreements, and you are any reports that you share to the grantor or communications that you share to the grantor with regard to how their funding was expended. You will make sure that that's there. One thing that's not included here that I just thought about was like debt. So like oftentimes like when folks have property, plant, and equipment, they will take on long-term debt. You want to make sure that you have copies of your like loan agreements and any specific like debt covenants that you have. Like auditors will check for like your compliance with your debt covenants. That's like a significant disclosure in most financial statements. And so you want to make sure that that is also included. But here's some items. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to make sure that, you're aware of like some item that would be considered. So for each financial statement line item, And if you have any questions, ask, and either you can put them in a chat, follow up after this, and book a consultation. So that's kind of the bulk. So the first kind of like half of the more than half of the session, I guess, is how to prepare and like why it's important. And then the next is like, now that you've got your audit report, it's how do you kind of like utilize the results, review them, analyze them, and then like really kind of like, how does it add value? So like I said in the intro, that audits are usually viewed as like a compliance mechanism or a compliance requirement, but they also do add value. So, you read through your audit reports, understand like, hey, what actually happened at the school? Does this make sense to our management team? Does it make sense from our operational, like from an operational standpoint, that the results are the way that they are? And not or, but like in addition, how would like your parents or any of your stakeholders like review your audit reports and say, is this school like being prudent with the financial resources that they are receiving from the state or the federal government? So that's kind of like the first bucket, is like reviewing your financial statements holistically, and then kind of like assessing like from a strategic perspective, does this make sense for our organization, and how could you like redesign or reallocate resources to make sure that it is addressing the needs of the stakeholders, because charter schools are authorized to educate. So making sure that, as you're thinking through your financial reports and like reviewing them, that like you're keeping your students and your families in mind as you're going through that. So that's the first bucket. The next is the management letter and the findings and recommendations that come from the audit, reviewing those and implementing the recommendations to help kind of like address any risk. So oftentimes, like if a internal control fails, auditors will have like alternative procedures to like address from like a substantive perspective, to make sure that like, no material misstatements have entered into the financial system. But that doesn't mean that the control did not fail, right? So just because it didn't happen this time doesn't mean that it could not happen. So taking those recommendations and implementing them to like really address the audit, like the internal control deficiencies, and address the risks that are presented by like missing or gaps in internal controls, then that's like a good idea and a good recommendation. So take the recommendations from the report and implement them. The third is kind of like a more strategic, and maybe not as like, it's strategic and it's also just like good protocol, good practice. But you'll have financial models that you have throughout the year to either forecast cash, to like help your board make strategic decisions, and update like how you guys, like how your organization is going to like, or like update your organization's strategic plan. And those numbers are usually like, sometimes they're updated throughout the year, but oftentimes they're updated like on an annual basis when the board goes through their strategic planning process. So you want to take the financial information that comes out of the audit and make sure that all of your models, either your forecast, so you'll make sure that all of the previous years that are being used to project into the future, that they all represent audited financial results. You will also want to update your strategic plans. So now that you have like a current set of financials that are audited, you want to like really review and make sure that you have like good or you have like enough resources to then update your strategic plan to say, hey, how can we invest in the growth and the development of our school, our curriculum, our students, and so on and so forth. So those are kind of like the financial models, like that's the bucket for this. So making sure that everything is validated with the audited results. And then the fourth is, going through your fundraising opportunities. So once you have an audit, the the results of the audit actually will end up like helping your organization like qualify for new like funding from either private foundations or new federal funding. So those are kind of like some of the value add from the audit. I think that's pretty much it on this slide. Yeah. And then the last slide here is just like a number of resources. So this is a slide with some key resources and links to resources. So this is financial statement like templates. And these came from the AICPA. They were updated in 2019 and they reflect the change in the accounting standards from restricted, like the removal of the temporarily restricted net assets account. So this is really only for like, this is relevant. So if you're a new school, you can start like with this as your baseline template for financials. If you are a federal, like if you receive like federal funding, like Title I or any title funding, and or ESSER maybe, then this OMB guidance is relevant for you because it includes like the requirements. And so, like I said, this one is the one that updated from 750 to 1 million this year. And then the third is here's like a database of like all DC public charters financials, so or historical audits. So if you want to like look at an example of what audited financial statements look like and that have passed like with clean opinions, you can refer to this database and kind of like find a school that mirrors your school model and or schools that have like similar operations, and you can reference those financial statements. The fourth here is like, these are all DC specific over on this side. So the approved auditors list. So like I said, the board has to like select the auditor. They can only select an auditor from this approved list. And here's the audit guidelines. So the requirements for auditors to comply with, some of the requirements for like disclosures, and some, and this last one is for submitting the data to your state authorizer. So this is DC specific, but any other schools within their jurisdictions, they will probably have something similar to this. So with that, I think that's the end. So we do regular webinars. This was like a sweet talk on financial management, specifically for mastering the audit. So hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Don't hesitate to reach out. Here's my email address, ozoemena@thebsuite.com or .co, and then the website to like review services from the B Suite and book a consultation are on the website. So if you have any questions, like I said, don't hesitate to reach out. But this is the B Suite. This is the B Suite Sweet Talk, and I think that is it for me. If you have any questions, I'm here for a little bit. Oh, and thank you for joining. I don't know if I said that.